March 1941. Mare Island, Naval Shipyard, Vallejo, California. The welding torch hissed like an angry serpent as Edward Nelson leaned into the glowing seam of a submarine's pressure hull. Molten metal spat in tiny sparks across his gloves, the heat pressing against his faceplate until his skin prickled. The gargantuan steel cylinder before him, framed by scaffolding and steam, was just one of dozens of submarines being rushed into production as the world inched closer to total war. Every weld had to be perfect, every bead clean, every joint reliable. Failure here, on a vessel that would dive into depths darker than night, could mean the deaths of 90 men. Nelson wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of a soot-covered glove. "Another 40 damn rivet lines," he muttered under his breath. "This is madness." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. All around him, the shipyard throbbed with industrial life, the pneumatic thump of rivet guns, the clanging of steel plates being maneuvered by cranes, the barked orders of supervisors trying to wring impossible schedules from exhausted crews. Men moved like ants across the skeletons of ships in various stages of construction. 1,000 torches flared like gold stars in a galaxy of smoke. For most workers, it was just another shift in a long line of them. 10 hours, 6 days a week, sometimes 7. But for Nelson, the monotony gnawed at him. The wastefulness of it, the inefficiency, the endless clash between riveters and welders as they fought over methods, time, and space. Two trades battling one another on the same steel, slowing the work, doubling the effort. It felt unnecessary, primitive. He stepped back and lifted his visor. The seam he had just welded flickered faintly as it cooled, a hair-thin, glowing line on a 20-ton hull section. It was beautiful work. Clean, consistent, strong. But the moment he turned away, he watched two riveters maneuver a bulky pneumatic gun toward the joint they were about to secure on the next plate over. The gun gave a deafening crack, crack, crack as they hammered rivets into the sheet metal. "Hey!" Nelson shouted. "Watch the slag! You're shaking loose the line I just put down!" The lead riveter didn't even look back. "Maybe if you welders didn't put down seams a breeze could break apart, we wouldn't shake 'em." Another barrage of rivets answered him before Nelson could reply. He gritted his teeth. It wasn't just personal irritation. It was a systems problem. Riveting required teams, time, perfect alignment, and constant rework. Welding was faster, but temperamental, requiring precision and technique. Both had strengths, but combining them in the wrong order created chaos. The shipyard's hybrid construction methods, pieced together from earlier decades and compromise, were grinding the entire operation down. Nelson had ideas, big ones, but welders were not paid to give ideas. They were paid to weld, not to question engineering philosophies the Navy had been refining for decades. Still, the thought kept returning. There has to be a better way. When his shift ended, he walked across the yard toward the narrow barracks where he stayed during long contracts. He should have been exhausted, but his mind was electric. Something had snapped in him during the shift, some combination of frustration and revelation. He set his lunchbox on the small metal desk in his room, pulled out a battered notebook, and wrote across the top of a blank page in jagged, uneven letters: "The riveting problem and the mad fix." He tapped the pencil against his knuckles. Welding could replace riveting in nearly every structural section, if it were standardized, simplified, and if the Navy trusted it. But they didn't. Not enough testing, not enough documentation, not enough belief that welds could outperform the tried-and-true rivet under pressure, vibration, and combat stress. But Nelson had seen what welding could do. He'd seen it save time, reduce material waste, and create cleaner, more reliable bonds. He stared at the page, his handwriting barely visible in the dim light. Then a thought hit him. a wild, untested, borderline reckless idea. The kind that got laughed at in the shipyard mess hall. The kind supervisors dismissed without reading past the first sentence. What if, he whispered to the silent room, the whole process could be done with one tool, one operator? He leaned over the notebook and scribbled furiously, hands shaking from excitement. A pneumatic welding hybrid unit, a device that could clamp two plates, heat them electrically, and apply pressure simultaneously, like a rivet gun and welder fused, a portable resistance welder, but refined, simplified, made for production lines. A gun that could weld with the speed of riveting, a tool that wouldn't require teams, just one skilled operator. He paused, staring at the crude sketch he had drawn, a bulky metal frame, handles on either side, the tip shaped like a rivet head but wired for electric resistance welding, a compact generator pack on the back, pressure clamps at the front. It was ugly, overly simplistic, technically flawed in several obvious ways, and utterly revolutionary. He sat back, breathless. "Hell," he murmured, grinning despite himself, "they'll call me insane." He wrote beneath the sketch, "Prototype, spot gun, goal, replace, riveting and manual welding in up to 30% of submarine joints, potential time saved per hull, 200,000 man-hours, fleet-wide potential, tens of millions of man-hours." He stared at the numbers, hardly believing them. But wasn't that the point? The shipyard was moving too slowly for the world's pace of war. Britain was already bleeding ships in the Atlantic. Germany was sharpening its claws. Japanese expansion threatened the Pacific. If America didn't speed up production drastically, the Navy would never field the fleet it needed before the storm hit. And here he was, an $11 a day welder, scribbling a fantasy that might just alter the course of naval engineering. He snapped the notebook shut. Tomorrow, he would take it to his foreman. He knew exactly what would happen. Laughter, a dismissive wave, maybe a warning to stop playing inventor during work hours. But he couldn't not try. The war wasn't waiting for the slow and cautious. The next morning, Mare Island was covered in a thin shroud of fog as Nelson crossed the yard. Workers moved like ghosts between the hulls, their boots clanging on metal planks. The scent of hot steel drifted through the air. He clutched the notebook under his arm like contraband. His foreman, Charles Red-Eye Marcus, stood near the scaffolding of the partially assembled submarine section Nelson had been working on the previous night. Marcus was a mountain of a man, with a permanent scowl etched into his face. Nelson approached him, clearing his throat. "Sir, do you have a minute? I have something I think you should see." Marcus didn't even turn. "If it's a request for less overtime, the answer's no." "It's about efficiency," Nelson said quickly. "A way to speed up hull assembly." That made Marcus turn, but only so he could give a long, suspicious stare. "You're a welder, Nelson, not an engineer." "Respectfully, sir," Nelson said, gripping the notebook tighter. "I think this could change the way we build submarines." Marcus sighed heavily. "Fine, make it quick." Nelson opened the notebook to the sketch and held it out. Marcus took it with 2 fingers as though it might be contaminated. He scanned the drawing, a slow frown creeping across his face. "What the hell is this?" Marcus asked flatly. "A welding riveter hybrid, a resistance welding portable unit, one operator, no need for rivet teams, faster, safer, cheaper." Marcus flipped the page as though expecting it to be a joke. Then he handed it back. "We don't pay you to design toys, Nelson." "It could save—" Marcus cut him off. "Don't say it. I know what pitch is coming. Save time? Save labor?" "You welders always think you can replace riveting entirely. If it were that easy, the Navy would have done it already." Nelson swallowed frustration. "Sir, just give me a trial. Let me build a prototype. On my own time, my own materials. I'm not asking the yard to fund it." Marcus stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Nelson," he said finally, voice low, "I appreciate enthusiasm, But this, he gestured vaguely at the notebook, isn't how the Navy works. Proposals go through channels. Tested, approved, signed by men who make 10 times what you do. So I can't try. Marcus looked away. No, and if you keep pushing it, you'll get labeled as a troublemaker, and we don't have room for troublemakers. Nelson's jaw tightened. It was a warning, a final one. And yet, the moment Nelson stepped away, the idea only grew more vivid. He watched a rivet team banging away at a panel he could weld clean in a fraction of the time. He saw the inefficiency, the outdated process, the waste the Navy refused to acknowledge. He thought, if I don't do this now, I never will. So he made a decision that would define the rest of the war. He would build the prototype himself, in secret, at night, with scrap metal, borrowed parts, and the stubbornness of a man fed up with doing things the slow way. The first hurdle was space. Shipyard facilities were tightly controlled. But there were corners. Forgotten sheds, abandoned tool rooms, storage huts filled with dust and discarded equipment. Every old industrial complex had them. He found his, at the far end of the yard, behind stacks of obsolete turbine casings, sat a tiny, weather-beaten structure with a rusted sign that read, metric calibration, shed Nasmensk 12, do not enter inside. The air was stale. Dust hung in thick layers across tools and crates. The workbench was covered in old gauges and measuring instruments that hadn't seen use since Hoover was president. Perfect. Nelson spent the first 3 nights cleaning, organizing, clearing a workspace, large enough to handle steel plates and electrical equipment. He smuggled in tools, a few at a time, a portable heater, a small arc welding unit, grinders, clamps, even a salvage generator he discovered half-broken behind a scrap pile. He worked until past midnight every night, returning to his bunk by 2 a.m., exhausted but exhilarated. The concept evolved rapidly. His early design, too bulky, too crude, shifted toward something more compact. A clamping head with resistance contacts, a foot pedal for power modulation, reinforced handles, adjustable throat depth. He scavenged copper bus bars from discarded switchgear, insulating grips from broken drill housings, springs from old recoil damping systems. Piece by piece, the spot gun took shape, and with each refinement, his belief grew stronger. This wasn't madness. This was progress. Real, tangible progress. By the second week, news of the secret project leaked unintentionally. One night, as Nelson was grinding a joint on the prototype frame, the door opened behind him. He spun around, heart hammering. It was Joseph Miller, another welder, a quiet, wiry man from Ohio who rarely spoke more than 10 words per shift. "What are you doing here, Ed?" Miller asked. Nelson hesitated. Should he lie? Downplay it? Hide it? Instead, he exhaled slowly. "Trying to fix the damn shipyard?" Miller stepped closer. "With whatever that thing is. A spot welding gun. Portable. Strong enough to replace riveting." Miller blinked. Then blinked again. "You're crazy." "I know." A long silence passed. Then Miller said, "I need help." Nelson stared at him. "You serious?" "You're right," Miller said. "We waste too much time, too much labor. If that thing works, hell, we could build submarines twice as fast." Nelson smiled. The project doubled in speed overnight. By the end of the month, a group of 5 welders, the Mad Five, as other workers jokingly called them, were assisting him. Not officially, not openly, quietly. After hours, driven by a mixture of frustration, curiosity, and the intoxicating thrill of doing something forbidden, their prototype grew sharper, cleaner, more functional. The steel frame was refined. The clamps became more precise. The wiring stabilized. The generator modifications were dangerous but effective. They tested the clamp force, the pressure heads, the resistance contacts. Finally, Late one night, Nelson positioned 2 steel plates between the clamps. He looked at Miller. "You ready?" "Do it." Nelson stepped on the pedal. A burst of electric light flared. The gun crackled. The plates glowed at the contact point, then cooled. He released the pressure clamps and held the plates up. A perfect weld, perfect, strong, fast. Nelson felt his breath leave him in a rush. "It works," Miller whispered. "No," Nelson said, staring at the shining weld spot. "It's going to change everything." Early April 1941. Mare Island Naval Shipyard, Vallejo, California. The sun was barely cresting the hills across the strait when Edward Nelson stepped out of calibration shed, Domeka 12, with a small, canvas-covered bundle tucked under his arm. The morning fog clung low across the shipyard, muffling the clatter of tools and the barked orders of supervisors. Workers moved through the mist like silhouettes in a half-formed sketch. Inside, the bundle was the prototype, the spot gun, the culmination of 6 weeks of stolen nights, borrowed tools, and exhaustion so deep it felt like he was dragging an anchor with every step. The welders who'd helped him, the Mad Five, had hidden their involvement carefully. This was Nelson's risk, Nelson's gamble, and Nelson's potential downfall. But today, he would finally show it to someone who could change things. The shipyard's master production engineer, Avery Harrison. The man who had, for decades, overseen the modernization of dozens of Navy vessels. A man known more for caution than innovation. But he was the only one who might listen. Nelson found him near the dry dock, inspecting the bow section of a nearly completed submarine. Harrison was leaning on a clipboard, squinting at the chalk markings on the hull. He was tall, silver-haired, impeccably clean, even in a shipyard filled with soot and grease, a man who always looked like he was on his way to a Navy board meeting. Nelson approached with hesitant determination. "Mr. Harrison," Nelson called out. Harrison glanced over, eyebrows raised. "Yes, you're Nelson, correct? A welder?" "Yes, sir. I was hoping for a moment of your time." Harrison looked at the bundle under Nelson's arm. "If you're here about overtime policy, talk to Marcus. I don't deal with labor disputes." "This isn't about hours, sir. It's about efficiency." Harrison's interest piqued just enough for him to turn fully to face Nelson. "Go on." Nelson took a slow breath. "Sir, I've built a new tool. Something that can change how we assemble hulls. It can weld seams as fast as a rivet team can attach plates." Harrison's face remained unreadable. "You built a new welding tool?" "Yes. And you did this where?" "In an unused calibration shed, after hours, with my own materials." Harrison's expression tightened. "That doesn't inspire confidence, Nelson." "I understand, sir. But if you see it, just see it. You'll understand why I'm here." Harrison studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment. Nelson felt sweat prickle beneath his collar. Then Harrison gestured. "Follow me." He led Nelson to a small inspection bay beside the submarine hull where tools were tested before being certified for use. It was a contained, controlled environment. Perfect. Harrison crossed his arms. "Show me." Nelson carefully pulled the canvas off the spot gun. Even Harrison blinked. The device looked nothing like anything in the Navy catalogs. It wasn't sleek or polished. It had the rugged, almost improvised appearance of a machine assembled from pure willpower rather than design consistency. A thick copper throat extended from the iron body, insulated handles on either side, and a hinged clamp system braced by springs and bolts. Heavy, yes, but feasible. "This," Harrison said slowly, "looks like a rivet gun mated with a transformer." "Close," Nelson said, smiling nervously. "It's a portable resistance welder." "You built this with scrap?" "Yes, sir." Harrison shook his head. "You're either brave, foolish, or both." "Maybe both, sir." Harrison chuckled once. Just once. "All right, Nelson. Show me what it does." Nelson positioned 2 steel plates and clamped them into the throat of the device. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear of the machine, but from fear of what Harrison would say. He stepped on the foot pedal. The spot gun hummed, then crackled with a controlled burst of electricity. Light flared briefly around the contact point and then died. Nelson lifted the gun away and held the plates up. A clean, perfect weld. Harrison's eyes widened. He examined the plates, running his fingers across the smooth, fused spot. He tapped it with a hammer from the workbench. It didn't budge. "This is impressive," Harrison admitted. "How fast can you apply these welds?" "Every 2 seconds, sir." Harrison blinked. "Faster than riveting. And the weld is stronger. Cleaner. Needs no backup team, no air hoses, no alignment jigs." "And pressure?" Harrison asked. "Adjustable. And heat minimization. Built into the clamp design, it's safe for thin hull plates." Harrison turned the plate over in his hands, visibly intrigued. Nelson's heart raced. Was this it? Was he about to change the Navy forever? Harrison looked up. "Nelson, this is—" A voice cut in. "What in the hell is going on here?" Nelson's shoulders tensed. It was Marcus. The foreman stomped into the testing bay like an enraged bull, his face already flushed red. "I just got told one of my welders is parading some contraband contraption in a Navy test zone." "Nelson, what are you doing?" Nelson hesitated. Harrison spoke first. "Relax, Marcus. I asked him to demonstrate this device." Marcus glared at the spot gun. "That thing? I told him to drop it weeks ago." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "You knew about this?" Marcus scoffed. "He brought me sketches. Looked like a child drew them. I said no. This is why." He waved aggressively at the prototype. "We don't have time for welders playing inventor." Nelson clenched his jaw. "Sir," he said to Harrison, "I built this because we're losing valuable hours every day. We could build more hulls, faster, safer." Marcus threw up his hands. "He thinks he can out-engineer the Navy. An 11-a-day welder." Nelson's fists balled at his sides. "A welder who sees problems every day that engineers ignore." There was a dangerous pause. Marcus looked ready to explode. But Harrison raised a hand. "That's enough from both of you." The two men fell silent. Harrison walked back to the spot gun, examining it with a gaze so intense Nelson felt the sweat bead on his forehead. Finally, Harrison looked at Nelson. "Your weld is impressive. The tool appears to work. But—" His voice softened, almost pitying. "This is not Navy-approved equipment. It hasn't undergone safety certification. It wasn't built with government materials. There is no documentation, no engineering report, no chain of command request, no authorization to test it, let alone propose it." Nelson felt his stomach drop. "So, what are you saying?" Harrison exhaled heavily. "I cannot approve it, Nelson. I cannot endorse it. I cannot bring this to the board. The Navy will never green-light a device constructed illegally in a shed by unauthorized hands." Nelson felt the world tilt. "But, sir, the device must be confiscated." Marcus cracked a satisfied grin. Nelson felt punched. "But you saw what it can do," Nelson protested. "You know it could change everything. Why won't you fight for it?" Harrison's expression was genuinely regretful. "Doesn't matter what I think. There are regulations, standards, procedures. We live or die by them here. That is how the Navy works." He handed the welded plates back to Nelson. "Your talent is remarkable, but this tool cannot be accepted. I'm sorry." The words landed like hammer blows. Marcus snatched the spot gun off the bench. "We'll lock it in storage until legal reviews decide what to do with it," he said smugly. Nelson stepped forward. "Sir, please." Marcus pointed a thick finger in his face. "You're lucky I'm not firing you for unauthorized equipment construction." "I was trying to help. And I told you no. You disobeyed. This ends now." Nelson looked to Harrison for support, but the engineer only lowered his gaze. "I'm truly sorry, Nelson." Marcus marched out with the gun under his arm. Nelson felt as if the world were collapsing inward. 6 weeks of work. Gone. His dream. Discarded. His effort. Mocked. That night, Nelson sat alone in shed Nagu 12, staring at the darkened space where the spot gun once sat. Tools were scattered everywhere, as though the absence of the device had torn the room apart. The bare bulb overhead flickered weakly. His notebook lay open on the workbench. The page with the first sketch, felt like a cruel joke now. He dropped his head into his hands. A quiet knock at the door pulled him from his misery. Miller stepped inside, his face grim. Behind him came two of the other welders, Sanders and Pike. All three looked solemn. "Marcus really took it?" Miller asked. "Locked away," Nelson replied bitterly. "Harrison rejected it." Sanders cursed under his breath. "After seeing it work?" "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "He said it wasn't built properly. Not authorized." Pike shook his head. "Bureaucratic nonsense." Nelson laughed humorlessly. "He said I'm lucky not to be fired." The room fell silent for a long time. Then Miller spoke quietly. "So, what now?" Nelson stared at the notebook. "I don't know." But something, deep in his gut, insisted he wasn't finished, that the idea was too big, too important to die in a storage locker, that the shipyard needed it, whether it knew it or not. He looked at Miller. "We're going to fight this." Miller's eyes lit. "How?" Nelson smirked. "By proving it works so well that even the Navy can't ignore it." Pike crossed his arms. "We don't have the gun." Nelson tapped his notebook. "Then we build another." The welders exchanged looks. Miller grinned slowly. "There's no stopping you, is there?" "Not anymore," Nelson said. "We'll build a better one. Stronger, cleaner. And this time, we'll make sure they can't reject it." Sanders cracked his knuckles. "You tell us what to do." Nelson took a deep breath. "Gentlemen, let's make history." Over the next week, Nelson and the Mad Five moved like ghosts through the shipyard. They scavenged with precision, slipping materials out of scrap piles and unused equipment yards. They worked in total secrecy. No lights through windows, no late-night noise loud enough to carry. But this time, Nelson wasn't building a prototype. He was building a masterpiece. He redesigned the clamps for better pressure distribution. He replaced the copper bus with a thicker, more heat-resistant alloy. He created a new trigger mechanism that combined pressure and power modulation into a single ergonomic motion. The gun was lighter, more efficient, more refined. He worked until his hands bled, until his eyes burned, until exhaustion blurred the edges of reality. But he kept going, because this wasn't just a tool anymore. It was a rebellion, a challenge to the old ways, a symbol of what innovation from the bottom could do. And on a cold, starless night, 2 minutes before dawn on April 22nd, they stepped back from the bench. The new spot gun lay gleaming beneath the lamp. Smooth, balanced, precise, perfect. Miller whispered, "Now what?" Nelson wiped his hands on his apron. "Now," he said, "we show the Navy the future." But destiny had already taken notice, because, while they celebrated quietly inside Shed 12, a figure watched from the shadows outside, a silhouette Nelson didn't see, someone who left silently, disappearing into the fog with urgency, someone running to tell Marcus. When dawn broke, alarms rang across Mare Island, and everything spiraled out of control. April 23rd, 1941. Mare Island Naval Shipyard, 04:20 hours. The first alarm bell shattered the dawn, calm, like a hammer blow. Edward Nelson jolted awake inside calibration shed. Nacker 12, still slumped over the workbench. The lamp above him flickered, buzzing faintly. His neck ached. His hands were raw. The second spot gun, the perfected version, sat gleaming on the table beside him, wrapped beneath an oilcloth. He blinked, disoriented. Then he heard the distant shouting, boots running, metal clanging. Orders barked. Something was very, very wrong. A sharp knock slammed against the shed door. "Nelson, open up now!" Nelson's blood went cold. That voice, furious, thunderous, could only belong to Marcus. Nelson stood, breath caught in his throat. Another knock. Harder. Open this damn door, or I'll have security break it down. Nelson glanced around the shed. The spot gun seemed to glow in the dim light, like a forbidden treasure. The welders who'd been with him last night must have left after finishing the build. He had fallen asleep, and Marcus must have seen them leaving. He hid the oilcloth-covered prototype beneath a stack of scrap metal sheets and wiped his hands nervously on his work clothes. "Coming!" he called out. He unlocked the door. Marcus burst in. His face was purple with rage, breath hot, eyes bulging. Behind him stood 2 uniformed Navy security men. "You think you can pull one over on me?" Marcus roared. "Building another one of those ridiculous contraptions? Again?" Nelson swallowed. "Sir, listen." "No. You listen." Marcus jabbed a finger at his chest. "You violated direct orders twice. You're done." "Here." Nelson stiffened. "You're firing me." "Damn right I am," Marcus snarled. "Pack your things. Turn in your badge. You're out by sunrise." The words hit Nelson like a physical blow. 16 years in the shipyard? Gone. But then a voice echoed from behind them. "Hold on just a moment, Marcus." Nelson turned. Avery Harrison stood in the doorway, breathing slightly harder than usual, coat still unbuttoned, as though he'd rushed across the yard. Marcus snapped to attention. "Sir, this is no longer your concern. This man disobeyed Navy instruction twice. He's finished." Harrison stepped inside, his calm presence filling the small shed. He looked around slowly, studying the tools, the parts, the workbench. Then he looked at Nelson. "Did you build another one?" Harrison asked. Nelson hesitated. "Yes, sir," Marcus barked. "See? Direct insubordination." But Harrison ignored him. He stepped toward the workbench. Nelson's heart pounded as Harrison's eyes fell upon the oilcloth-covered shape beneath the scrap metal. He lifted the metal sheets carefully and pulled the prototype free. He set it on the table, his face unreadable. He traced a finger along the handle, the pressure clamp, the copper throat. Then he exhaled softly. "Beautiful work," he said. Marcus sputtered. "Sir, you can't possibly be considering taking this seriously." Harrison looked at Marcus with a cool, measured expression that could freeze steel. "Marcus," he said, "have you read the latest directive from Washington?" Marcus blinked. "Directive?" "Admiral Rickover's report, the one about labor shortages. The Navy wants to increase ship production by 30%. 30. In less than a year." Marcus fell silent. Harrison continued. "We don't have the manpower. We don't have the time. We don't have the luxury of ignoring ideas because they come from welders." He turned back to Nelson. "You claim this one is better than the first?" Nelson nodded. "Much better." "And safer?" "Yes. And faster." Nelson met his eyes. 20% faster than the first one? Maybe more." A quiet settled across the shed. Harrison straightened his shoulders. "Then we're going to test it." Marcus stammered. "Sir, no, you can't just—" "I can," Harrison said sharply. "And I will." He gestured to the security officers. "You two, stay here. Nobody enters or leaves this shed without my order." Then he looked at Nelson. "Bring the gun. We're going to the proving floor." There are 438 hours. The proving floor was a cavernous testing hall used to evaluate new tools, alloys, and fabrication techniques. Floodlights hung from the ceiling. Steel test plates were stacked in tall rows. Engineers and technicians were beginning their shifts, bleary-eyed and coffee-deprived. Harrison marched in with Nelson right behind him. Marcus followed reluctantly, simmering with poorly concealed fury. "Clear Station 3, Harrison ordered. Workers scrambled aside. Harrison stood with his hands behind his back as Nelson placed a set of steel hull plates onto the bench. Everyone watched. Whispers spread. Some recognized the strange tool in Nelson's hands. "What is that?" "Looks like a rivet gun." "No, some kind of welder." "Is that the thing Marcus confiscated last week?" Nelson ignored them. His focus was absolute. He positioned the plates, clamped them, lifted the spot gun. The gun felt alive in his grip, balanced, powerful, like an extension of his own will. He looked at Harrison. The engineer nodded once. Nelson stepped on the pedal. The gun hummed. A brilliant spark flared. The plates heated and fused. 1 second, 2. Weld complete. He reclamped, stepped again. Another perfect spot weld. Then another, then another. The room fell utterly silent. In 20 seconds, Nelson laid down 10 flawless welds. A rivet team would need nearly 3 minutes. Harrison took the welded plates, turning them over under the light. He tapped one of the welds with a hammer. The plates didn't budge. He tapped again. Harder. No movement. He turned to Marcus. Stronger than riveting? Marcus swallowed. And faster, Harrison added. Much faster. He walked toward a group of engineers at the back of the room. Run structural tests, he ordered. Now. They nodded. Carrying the plates to a hydraulic tensile machine, the device gripped the plates and slowly pulled them apart with immense force. The weld held, and held, and held. The metal around the weld warped first. The weld itself refused to break. An engineer stared at the reading gauges. Sir, this weld is stronger than our standard arc welds. Harrison nodded slowly. Yes, I thought that might be the case. Marcus, for the first time in his life, looked genuinely afraid. The test engineer whispered, "Who built this thing?" Harrison pointed at Nelson. "He did." The engineer blinked. "He's not even an officer." Harrison smiled faintly. "Genius isn't limited to officers." Nelson felt heat rise behind his eyes. For the first time, someone believed in him. 5-10 hours, a panel of senior engineers gathered on the proving floor within minutes of the test. Radio men had been dispatched. Reports were typed. Breathless runners delivered summaries to supervisors across the yard. Marcus attempted to argue. He disobeyed orders. Harrison cut him off. And his invention may save 50 million man-hours when applied to multiple shipyards. One engineer asked, "Isn't this all theoretical?" Harrison held up the weld plate. "Does this look theoretical?" The engineer responded, humbled, "No, sir." Another asked, "But will Washington approve something built in a shed?" "That," Harrison said, "is why we're going to build a proper version. Today." Nelson blinked. "Sir?" Harrison turned to him. "You, Miller, and your team will be assigned, unofficially for now, to a prototype development group. You'll be paid for your hours. I'll handle the paperwork." Marcus's jaw dropped. "You can't reward him for this." "I'm not rewarding him," Harrison said. "I'm saving the Navy." He placed a hand on Nelson's shoulder. "You changed the game, son." Nelson swallowed hard. "Sir, thank you," said. Harrison nodded. "Don't thank me yet. There will be backlash, regulations, reviews, audits. Washington may try to bury this." "Let them try," Nelson said quietly. Harrison smiled. "That's the spirit." 1 month later, the room was packed with officers in white uniforms, civilian engineers in suits, and dour-faced administrators who looked allergic to innovation. Nelson sat at the end of the long conference table, out of place among men with far greater rank and influence. The spot gun, now professionally rebuilt and refined, rested on a display stand beside him. Admiral Rickover leafed through the briefing packet. "So," he said, "you're telling me this thing," he pointed at the gun, "can replace riveting?" "Not entirely," Harrison answered, "but up to 35% of submarine hull seams, 40% on destroyers and cruisers." "And how much labor does that save us?" "Roughly 50 million man-hours across the duration of the war." Silence. Then the Admiral asked, "Who designed it?" Harrison nodded toward Nelson. "He did." A few officers frowned. One muttered, "A welder? Not possible." Rickover ignored them. He looked directly at Nelson. "What made you build it?" Nelson hesitated, then answered truthfully, "Sir, I got tired of watching the shipyard waste time we didn't have." Rickover's lips twitched into the faintest smile. "I appreciate candor." He stood and approached the spot gun, ran his fingers along its polished metal surface, examined the pressure clamp, the ergonomic handle. Then he turned to the evaluation committee. "This tool is approved," he said simply. Marcus would have fainted if he'd been there. The board erupted with questions, protests, shock, but Rickover silenced them with a single raised hand. "We are losing ships every week," he said. "We need submarines. We need destroyers. We need speed." He tapped the spot gun. "This gives us speed, and I don't care if it was built in a shed by a welder with no engineering degree. If it works, and it does, then we adopt it. Immediately." Nelson felt his breath catch. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. Rickover turned back to him. "Son," he said, "you just helped us win a war we haven't even entered yet." The shipyard looked different. Spot guns hung on tool racks across multiple buildings. Welders were trained on them daily. Production speed increased so dramatically that Washington sent observers just to confirm the numbers weren't exaggerated. Submarines that once took months to build were now completed weeks faster. Destroyer hulls flew through assembly. Riveters, once overworked, found themselves reassigned to expanded roles where their skills mattered most. The Mad Five were given official commendations. And Nelson. He stood in front of the latest completed submarine section, spot gun holstered at his side, overseeing a team of welders who no longer argued with riveters because the workflow was streamlined and efficient. A Navy captain approached. "Nelson," he said, "Washington approved your design for Pacific-wide rollout. By next year, every major shipyard will be using your gun." Nelson nodded humbly. "Thank you, sir." "Any thoughts on what you'll invent next?" Nelson looked at the welders around him, at the shipyard he loved, at the steel behemoths rising from the docks. He smiled. "Well, there's always something that can be improved." The captain clapped him on the back. "That's what I like to hear." As the captain walked away, Miller approached with a grin. "Think they'll ever stop calling us the Mad Five?" Nelson smirked. "Well," he said, "after saving 50 million man-hours, I think the whole Navy's mad now." They laughed. They got back to work, and the spot gun, a rejected idea, born in a dusty shed, went on to shape the American fleet that would fight across the Pacific. History would remember admirals, shipbuilders, and commanders, but deep in the heart of Mare Island, the workers remembered something else. That sometimes the war is won not by generals, but by welders with an idea. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.